Welcome in, everybody, to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Boy, do I have an exciting show for you today, folks. I came across a book that I think you guys are going to be excited about. You know, it's rare in the paranormal field that we get paranormal fiction that is exciting, that tickles the senses, that tells a good story, and is true to the field. In other words, puts out accurate information out there, and not only puts out accurate information, but combines it, like I said, with that great story. And you get the combination of both, and it suspends your disbelief. Is that the proper term? And you're sitting there going, wait a minute, is what I'm reading real life? How much of this is real life and how much of this is fiction? And I just read a book that I can't tell the difference. I honestly can't tell the difference. And so I had to have the author on myself to ask him that very question. Paul Vecchiet is my guest today, and he's written an amazing book called The Disclosure Paradox, Book 1. And I got to tell you, folks, this book absolutely blew me away. Let me tell you a little bit about Paul. We'll bring him on. Paul G. Vecchiet was born in Italy, came to the United States with his parents at the age of 3. He lived most of his life in the Chicago area, and he graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in architecture design. He's a former officer of 13 years with the U.S. Air Force, and Paul continued his work in the military as a member of the U.S. Army. Paul is a licensed architect. He lives with his wife, Janice, and grandson, Lennon, on the southern slope of a mountain in rural West Virginia. Now, Paul has a very interesting story in that Paul is a design manager for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or was at one time, and drew from real-life experiences for this novel. I'm going to bring him in now and welcome him in to Darkness Radio for the very first time. Paul, welcome in, and thank you so much for being on the program, and we'll tell a little bit about your story. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me. You certainly have given me some smiles in how you mentioned and described the book. I appreciate that.
Well, I tell you, Paul, it's very rare. You know, I found a lot of paranormal fiction that I read is you know, it's kind of left to center. You know, it's you read it and you go, well, that was a nice attempt at trying to bring the truth into the field. You know, it's either they try to throw a little truth in there and the story goes kind of out of bounds, and you're like, well, that was kind of believable, but not really. But it was a nice attempt. What you've managed to do here, Paul, is you've taken a lot of what we know already. You've combined it with a very nice story, and man, it's like getting hit with the fire hose with so many different things, and even things I didn't know, right? There's some things there that I didn't even know.
Okay.
And I got to tell you one thing, and I'm going to give you kudos for this one thing before we start here. I myself have had problems with meditation for years, and it's that whole thing where I start to meditate and I fall asleep.
Yeah.
I think you cracked it for me. I honestly think you cracked it for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good.
Through the main character, Louis
Silvani,
through his issue, I think you cracked it for me.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought, you know what, that makes sense. I can leave it for people in the book to read, but or we can discuss it here. But it was very interesting that, you know, I've had these blocks. You know, people tell me, well, you're just falling asleep. Well, you know, you're getting to a certain point when you meditate and then you fall asleep. But what's interesting is, much like Louis Silvani, I grew up Catholic, you know, and a lot of Louis' journey as a Catholic is a lot of the same journey I had. I'm reading this character and I'm like, geez, Paul, you reached into my brain and you pulled out my experience.
There's a lot of people that would relate to that. I mean, it's a very common, you know, history of our upbringing, right?
Right. And it's interesting as Louis is taking his journey, and we'll get into Louis' journey a little bit in the second part of the program here. I want to find out a little bit more about you first, but you came with this idea that he eventually needs to learn how to meditate, and he had to somehow reconcile the Catholic side of him with meditation, and you found a way to do it. And I was like, that, of course. And I went, that's so simple.
Yeah.
Right?
It is. They complicate things when they try and reason. But meditation, everyone should do that because we have a gift. And the gift is only opened up when we start to meditate. And when you meditate, because of that gift, because of linking with the spiritual realm, you start to understand your role better in relation to the universe. You start to understand why things happen to you and what is important that you take away from your experiences. So it's meditation is listening to God. Prayer is talking to him. See, so it's much more beneficial if we meditate.
There's something brilliant you say in the book, and it's along that lines, that meditation, again, is listening to God. Prayer is talking to him. You also say something about, and it's broken down by some of the characters in the book, about God being source and angels answering prayer. And it's split between God and angels and who answers those prayers, which is interesting.
Right.
It's an interesting, I want to call it more than theory. It's actually action. It's the way that the universe kind of works. And when you think about it, it really is that really kind of is how things work. It's, you kind of, if you think of it this way, God kind of has too much to do in order to listen to you. Like, for an example, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, right? I mean, originally you come from Chicago. You've probably thrown a lot of prayers up for the Bears to do more than just go to the Super Bowl twice, right? So you're probably going, well, I wish they'd win this game. Well, God's not going to answer that. God's not a Bears fan. He's not a Vikings fan, right?
Right.
But if you throw up a prayer to a guardian angel or to a saint or whoever you're throwing it up to, well, maybe they would interfere, right?
It's not guardian angels. It's our guardians and our guides. And those are the key relatives that have passed on that watch over us. And prayer to them is effective. They will listen to you. There was a time that I had a problem and I talked to my father passed away and my grandmother passed away. And the next day, the problem was gone. So that's a piece of the puzzle that we need to know about our spirituality.
Which is very interesting. I find that highly fascinating. There's a lot of things in this book. And again, you blur the line so brilliantly between fiction and nonfiction, right?
Right.
I want to get to how you came across, because really we're going to explore military secrets, extraterrestrials, and humanity's future a little bit here today.
Good.
And in this book, the disclosure paradox, because it does open with such I think what a lot of our listeners here today are interested in, and that is, we look up in the skies, we see lights. We look up in the skies, we see craft. We look up in the skies, and it is such a hot topic right now, Paul.
Sure.
And I think probably hotter than it's been since, let's face it, the 80s, right? 70s and 80s.
Sure. Yeah.
People are intrigued. You worked for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and you had an experience that you came across something, didn't you? What did you come across that got you interested in all this?
It was influential in putting me on the path, but not immediately, because once I came across it, I realized that it was very sensitive information, and I kept the secret 5 years after I left the service. So what I found at where I was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I was a civil engineering officer, and my job was to manage construction of projects that are, renovations and rehabilitations. So this particular project was in a warehouse type facility that was highly secured. It was called Foreign Technology Division. And the key thing about Foreign Technology Division is that it's compartmented, where individuals in one room, you have a cipher lock, but they don't know what's going on in the other room. And there are many rooms like that. The doors don't have numbers. There is no directory. Everything is white. And even if you have a top secret clearance, you were escorted. So I was escorted to the second floor because the second floor was, everything was removed down to the studs and the exterior wall. And they were going to put in huge computer systems in there. What I found looking at drawings, which are called as-built drawings, which are the drawings that essentially tell you the state of the building before the project. I was thumbing through them and I saw a floor plan for a basement. Well, normally warehouses don't have basements. It's not economical. And yet this matched the footprint, the outline of the building. So I thought, there's something odd going on here. And then I turned the page, and there's a detailed plan of a cryogenic chamber, which is dimensioned 70 by 90 feet. And right there, I knew that's something, first of all, that should not be in those drawings. And second of all, I did not have a need to know. So realizing the sensitivity of the information, I put it away, made it look like I didn't see it, and went on my own work. And as I mentioned, I kept that secret for 5 years after I left. If you read Phil Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, he writes in there that when they were shipping the cadavers out of Roswell, they shipped them directly to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So right there, I knew that there was a connection. And incidentally, if you go on Google Earth to try and find this facility, it's been removed. There's a parking lot there. If you go into records to find out the name and the number of facility, it doesn't even exist anymore.
Really?
Yeah.
So if those bodies aren't there anymore, where do you surmise, if you just had to take an educated guess, where do you surmise they put them?
So I've heard that they were taken to Army. I forget. It's in Maryland. There's a Army base over there where they have laboratories.
Okay.
That's what I understand that they were transferred to.
Interesting. So much like your real life experience, our character in the book has a similar experience.
Correct.
But takes it one step further, and he's been on the lecture circuit. He tries to, except for he's studying intraterrestrial, so
right,
aliens within the Earth. But he gets called out on the lecture circuit as, you know what, you haven't traveled around the world. You really don't know what's going on in Antarctica and these different places that you're trying to lecture about. Go back and do your research, which is kind of true to form. I mean, if you've been to some conventions and you really don't know your stuff, people will call you out on it, especially
absolutely.
The UFO
they could be
community.
hostile.
Yeah. Have you been around on the circuit and seen some of this, or have you been to some MUFON meetings and seen some of this?
I've been to one a while back, and I was first I was impressed by the diversity of the crowd, and how some people look like they belong to be talking instead of being in the crowd,
Yeah. Yeah. There are some people who I want to say take the hobby to a whole new level. That's one way of putting it.
Oh, yeah.
There are others who are experiencers that I think, I don't want to say go beyond passionate, but at this point it's become life consuming, right? I think that's another way of putting it. And rightfully so. I mean, if you're an experiencer, it's all consuming, because when something happens to you that's that altruistically strange, right? And you can't explain it, you need answers.
Right.
And then there's the ultimate skeptics that show up, I think, to those meetings for anything just to heckle. I don't get that mindset either. That you would go out of your way to go to a convention or a meeting or a MUFON meeting just to get your jollies or your rocks off and say, well, I don't believe any of this, right?
Well, I could tell you, Tim, that I get more pushback from atheists about what's in my book than I do from people that are religious.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. To the point of being hostile, to the point of saying that I'm lying, or that I'm making everything up, or that I offer no proof. Well, I can't offer proof in meditation. It's a personal thing.
Right.
You can't.
Right.
You can't prove it.
Well, that's the thing. True. Spiritual experiences, you're right, you can't prove, because you're having an inter experience or an internal experience. It's nothing you can necessarily prove. And it's not anything you're going to prove until the minute you expire off the planet, right? I mean, that's, and science, and we could go back and forth for an hour on this too, but science as it is right now is trying to experiment to try and prove that there's an afterlife. I mean, they've gone so far as trying to hook it to quantum physics, and that there's a quantum physical afterlife. So those who want to say, well, there's no scientific proof, well, let's start pointing you to some of these scientific experiments that they're doing right now, having to do with the quantum physical afterlife, and the fact that there are scientists that are hanging their hat on the fact that there is scientific proof that there's an afterlife. So, I don't necessarily buy the whole skeptical side of things so much anymore either. I mean, I used to be a hardcore skeptic at one time too, but after seeing a lot of things over the last few years, and seeing a few scientists come out and say, well, no, let's slow our roll a little bit here. Let's take a look at some of the scientific basis for an afterlife. It's changed my mind a little bit. So, yeah, I've read some scientific papers on it, so it's kind of interesting. It's interesting what they think. So, what's really interesting about this book, The Disclosure Paradox, Paul, is that you've brought a lot of military experience into this book. Explain your main character, Louis, and his military background, what he does.
Yeah, Lewis pretty much has had the same experience that I had. The book could be an autobiography, because I base Lewis on myself. Except I'm not a researcher, right? I'm not a ufologist, but so I inject that to add to the plot. But Lewis is a civil engineer, and he knows how buildings are put together. He knows how projects are put together. He knows how to make a plan for a design project, and he knows a lot about construction.
Now, in this, Lewis is going through his own spiritual journey, and he's growing, but he's growing very rapidly. So he goes from a man who shows up at a convention and basically, I don't want to say gets booed out of the building, but he goes to present his view on intraterrestrials. I'm trying to get that term down. And he's told, go back and do your research, go and travel to these countries, see what it is that you're trying to speak on. Where he's told by a woman, is it Mary Ellen, right?
Mary Ellen.
Yep.
Yeah. She's a Hickory Apache woman.
That's right. That you know what? I can take you to one of the places that you're wanting to investigate. That, you know what, if you want to actually see this for yourself, if you want to travel to this place, I can take you there. But she has an agenda as to why she wants
Absolutely.
to go. Okay. And in that agenda, she also realizes there's something special about Lewis. And in the same way, and she also has abilities.
Yes.
And that's kind of where the story starts to take off. Are there personal and some spiritual experiences of yours that inspired this as well?
Absolutely, yeah. All the meditative experiences that are described in the book are based on real events that happened to me. All of the characters are based on real people. So all of the psychic women are based on the women that that talk to Lewis, or the I don't know if you read about Anne, who is the mentor. So she's based on a woman that I know that she's the one that would actually have contact with what I call the Watchers.
Okay.
And she would go into a trance, and they would contact me through her, and she wouldn't know what she would be telling me or writing to me until after she gets out of the trance and realizes what she wrote to me, because it's all their words. And that was a huge impact on me, because what they were telling me was to keep doing what I was doing.
Really?
Because I started to write the book, yeah. And they essentially, everything that is in the book, in that chapter where Anne has a regressive therapy meditation with him, that's all based on what happened between me and the other woman. Yeah.
So is there, okay, so I'm gonna take you back a little bit here, Paul, because the Watchers are kind of key to the book, and that the Watchers are kind of, how would you describe it? They're kind of overseers, or what? Who are the Watchers in your words?
They're overseers. They're guides for Mary Ellen and for Anne. Not much. It's indirect for Lewis. Lewis is more direct with Anne, and Anne is direct with the Watchers, and that's about it. And of course, Mary Ellen says that they are kind of like in charge of making sure that there's nothing that is being done outside of the laws of the universe.
So are they extraterrestrial in origin? Are they angelic in origin?
Yes.
They're extraterrestrial.
No, they are just under the realm of the angelic realm.
Okay.
So they kind of take orders from the angels.
Interesting. Okay. So they're there just to guide and to make sure that things flow the way they're supposed to flow.
Right.
How is it that some people do they have to be a little higher on the psychic order in order to contact them or have contact with them? Is that how that kind of works?
If you have a need to know, if you have a role to play, that your spirit made an agreement, a contract before coming into the human form, you'll know. Some people are that way. Some people aren't. I mentioned in the preface, this about destiny and fate, and how some people have roles to play, and they find out later on how all of the various decisions that were made in the past contributed to the role that they have been given. So that's pretty much it,
Interesting. Very interesting. There's a lot of interesting things in here. I'm going to backtrack and sidetrack a little bit. You even tip your cap to Coast AM. There's a little bit of a tip of the cap there.
I don't mention them, but yes.
Yes, you don't mention the program outright, but you mentioned listening to a late night program. It's okay. I produced Ian Punnett on Coast to Coast AM. I produced Dave Schrader on Coast to Coast AM. I worked for Coast for quite a few years. So it's kind of nice to hear or at least see it in print that was an inspiration. So that was fun to see. So yeah, it was fun to see it there in print that it reached yet another person. So it was kind of fun to see that.
I do a little bit of there's a lot of mentions that have to do with pop culture in the book that people will relate to, especially if you're from Chicago.
Yeah. And there's it's one of those, and whether you're an Art or a George guy, or you don't have to say which one you are, Paul. I'm not going to put the pressure on you. But it's the program itself, it again inspired this program, and it continues to, be a program that inspires. Linda Moulton Howe is mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For real.
Which is great. Tell me a little bit about how she inspired you.
Well, just listening to that segment about Alaska, the individuals that went up to Alaska, and the sergeant that called her about learning about that underground pyramid near Denali. That's where I put her in there. I have to obviously, give her credit for that.
Yeah.
Because that's an incredible story.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. I tell you what, let's take our break here. When we come back, I want to get deeper into the book. I want to talk a little bit about, and again, I'm trying to do this a little bit spoiler free. I want to talk a little bit about Lewis's spiritual destination, and I want to get a little bit deeper into the spirituality of this thing, because I want to talk about how eventually that Catholic journey becomes more of a spiritual journey. I want to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about the aliens involved here, because there's a few of them, and you manage to traverse the different alien races. So I want to talk about a few of the ones that are in this book and where the knowledge comes from. You even bring up chemtrails at one point. Chemtrails and contrails.
Yeah, I do, don't I? Yeah.
You do, which is interesting. So I want to get your perspective about this as someone who's worked inside the government and where the knowledge came from. And it's a quick blurb, but man, you laid it out there. Boom, like that. So I want to get that when we come back. Paul Vecchiet is my guest. The Disclosure Paradox, Book 1. It's a wonderful book, folks. We have a link in the description of this program, so you can go get it right now. I'll tell you, it blurs that line between fiction and reality. You know it's a story, but boy, does Paul drop knowledge on you. It's got historical references in there. So you've got historical references to different paranormal cases in there. Not only just Roswell, but Rendlesham, and different cases are mentioned in there. You've got, like I said, we're going to talk chemtrails, contrails today. We're going to talk alien races today. And even an alien race that helps out in this story. We'll talk about them as well. We'll talk about the good ones versus the bad ones. That'll come up in the next segment. And we'll talk about how all of this was involved directly with Paul. That's coming up next in our next segment. You're listening to the best and watching the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Our guest is Paul Vecchiet. The name of the book is The Disclosure Paradox, Book 1. And we have a link in the description of this program, so you can go get it right now. Wonderful book. It kind of blurs the line between fiction and reality. And I'm telling you, folks, it's one of the best paranormal fiction books I've read in quite some time. So I want you to go check it out right now. So, Paul, before the break, we were talking a little bit about your experiences with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a little bit about how you came about discovering a little bit about what was underneath Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and a little bit about your interest in the whole alien phenomena. So now I'm going to ask you a little bit about the book, because in the book, our character Lewis has this growing fascination with aliens, which turns into him meeting Mary Ellen, which turns into you have this destiny to help with this journey of him finding out more, which he thinks is just going to be helping him with his speaking career. It turns into a whole different deal. Mary Ellen has this whole agenda for him, which he's supposed to grow and change and become something else. And it turns into an agenda to help her with another mission. In the meantime, I think it's safe to say that the initial mission is to try and get into a base, right?
The initial mission, Lewis thought, was just to get there and walk around and see it, not get into it, not at all. Only later on, when they're talking with people that live nearby there, that one of them is a former Army Ranger. That's when Mary Ellen is forced to tell the truth about what she wants to do. It never was about going into that base until she finally had to reveal it.
And she's revealing stuff in little dribs and drabs. It's not...
Yeah, little by little.
Yeah, she doesn't just come right out and say, well, Lewis, guess what? Here's the entire situation. She's not very forthcoming, but I think because if she just let it all out, he would say, no, you're crazy. I'm not doing this.
That, and she's kind of being an observer too. She's observing him and letting him grow on his own. With every meditation, he goes to her and says, "This is what happened to me," and then she tells her why it happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, when they do reach just outside of Dulce, when they meet her friend Katrina and Robert, that's when things finally start to open up for everyone, including Deborah, who is hanging on because she finds out that something happened to her too.
Right. Now, are you finding, especially in your own experiences, that you have to learn things in dribs and drabs in order to grow spiritually? You can't drink from the fire hose, so to speak. You can't get all this knowledge at one time, that you have to kind of unfold like a flower in order to grow?
So, yes. Imagine drawing an S curve, right?
Okay.
With multiple S's. That is the path that you go through life in chronology, okay? Now imagine a line going straight through that, okay? Every point that intersects with that S was meant to happen. But in between, things, were not exactly in the same direction as that destiny line. But things happen. And that's how life is that there are key points in life that point to your destiny, but you don't go there directly.
Okay. It's interesting, and the reason I ask this is this. When we're born, we pretty much are. I don't want to use the word indoctrinated, but I'm going to use it. We're indoctrinated into the religion that our parents believe, right? So or our grandparents and parents. So it's this is what we believe. So we're gonna just initiate you into what it is we believe. It's at a certain age that you either rebel or you believe the same thing that your parents do, right? And then you come of a mind of, okay, I'm either going to glom onto what it is they believe or I'm going to form my own opinion. Where is it that you believe that you decide you're going to go one direction or another?
Right from the start, right when I was a third grader, I just had problems with what they were teaching me. Everyone else, all the kids, were getting good grades in Catholicism, and catechism, and I guess they call it Christian doctrine. Um, and I was getting bad grades, and it was really upsetting my parents. But um, I, I was mature enough where I was not going to be. Um, I wasn't blindly going to follow something that everyone else was following. I had that critical thought early in life, and I carried it all the way until eighth grade. And then in high school, that's when I learned about the book of Ezekiel in the Bible, and the chariots of the gods, right?
Right. And then Eric von Daniken and others,
Right.
right? And then you kind of you spin off from there, and then the journey begins, so to speak. Where does that? And I take it you probably looked into the Anunnaki and whatnot. Where do you stand on that briefly?
Well, I tell you, there's so much information out there, and like Nibiru, right?
Right.
You've heard about Nibiru.
Yep.
Like it was supposed to show up 2012, and all. I just I have a hard time uh, just accepting a specific like date of arrival. They may be out there. They may have been the individuals that the race that created humans as a slave race to mine gold in Africa. But as far as like the return, I'm not following that.
I get you. So you, on your spiritual path, as opposed to where Lewis's spiritual path went, where was it in your path that you decided, okay, so Catholicism isn't quite it, but I need to follow a different path? Where did you go from being Catholic to spiritual? Where did that turn for you? Did it happen while you were working for the Corps of Engineers, or did it happen elsewhere?
It's a very slow evolution. First of all, I pretty much denounced Catholicism, and I had a real hard time about religion for a while. I was atheist, and then I kind of got agnostic, okay? Because I kind of reasoned that there was something going on. But so I've been kind of dormant as spiritually for a very long time until things really started to happen to me, which probably I would say it was about 2009 when I started to meet up with all these psychic women, and they would tell me that I had a role to play. And then one of the women taught me how to meditate, and I started to meditate. And then that's when everything just started to open up to me. And if you take my life from 2009 to present, that's 2009 was the start of the hardcore spirituality.
When you meditate, what is it that you see when you meditate?
So I think it's important that we don't force in meditation. We just let it happen. And I was fortunate that I had two very profound experiences that people who have meditated for years don't get to have. But that's it. Every other time when I meditate, like you, I tend to either drop off and sleep, or nothing happens. And even if nothing happens, meditation is still good for you, because 15 minutes of meditation is just as good as an hour nap. If you quiet yourself down and you just focus on your breathing, it relaxes the brain, because your brain still does a lot of work while you're napping and stuff. So the meditation kind of shuts everything off, and I wouldn't be disappointed if someone doesn't have things happen to them, if they don't see things happen to them right away, it's all, if it's meant to be, it will happen. We don't have control over that. At least I don't.
That's I think, is that part of the problem with meditation? Is the fact that you may lose control and that you don't want to give over control, so that you do hit that wall, you hit that block?
I wouldn't say control as far as just guidance. And there are people that say, because they're concerned about demonic impact during meditation. So what they say is to shield yourself before you meditate, where you imagine yourself in a golden globe, for example, or a pyramid that shields the evils away from you, and that you're free to just meditate without a threat.
And again, there's that little passage in the book. I think that I think it summed it up brilliant for me. I think I haven't tried it yet. But I think I'm going to try it tonight to see if it gets me past that block, that meditation block. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So now I want to switch it up a little bit, but I'm going to do it by making this transition. When you've meditated, have you ever seen an alien race, or have you ever had an alien approach you during meditation?
No. What has happened to me is that I was able to feel and see the realm where the spirits go between lives to congregate, and by way of indigo flashes, which demonstrate either a downloading or an uploading of information, this mass of spirits is actually what they call the source energy, which is what God. So when they say in the Bible that God is within us and around us, that actually should be taken literally, because those spirits are connected, or were connected to another form, and their energy. And so when you combine all those energies and in one mass, and has one consciousness, and if you consider that those energies have the power of thought, which is noetics, and you combine all of that power, then you can understand how God made light, or God made whatever, because all it takes is that massive thought power for things to happen.
So is this why the power of prayer is so strong?
Power of prayer is strong in numbers.
Okay.
The more there was an event in Atlanta in 1997 where students at the university meditated on peace during the peak period of gang violence. And at that time, the violence dropped precipitously. So there is a hypothesis that in great numbers, under the same thought, that we could have an impact on the natural world.
Interesting. So let me ask you an interesting question. Is it of your opinion or your knowledge that aliens pray too?
Why not? Yeah. In fact, well, so there's truth out there, and we're probably shielded from the truth for various reasons. But there are probably some life forms out there that do know what's going on, and I think, like I said, I would substitute the word prayer with meditation.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. Speaking of aliens, and again, I'm making this slow transition to aliens. You mentioned quite a few races in the book. One of the first ones you mentioned, as they're making their way towards this base, is reptilians.
Yes.
Now, I've heard two different schools of thought when it comes to reptilians. From one side, you hear, no, reptilians are the good guys. You hear no, the good guys are the ones who you can trust. From another school, you hear, no, they're the bad guys. You don't want to trust them. What is your belief, and what is it that you know? And do you know something that we don't know? Is there something that you've heard that we don't know?
I've heard from a woman that was very in tune that there are all kinds of races of reptilians and insectoids, and they're good and bad. You point to a human. Is that a good human or a bad human? By appearance, you won't know. Same thing with the extraterrestrials. There are good groups and bad groups, and I also submit that there are groups out there that are rogue groups, that they're not aligned with an organization, or they're not aligned with a country or a planet or anything like that. That they're on their own for their own benefits and for their own mischief. And so, to generalize that a specific form of extraterrestrial is good or bad, I think is flawed.
Okay. That's fair enough. You bring up not just a theory, but you bring up something in the book that's not the first time I've heard it, but it knocks something home for me. And that is that the Greys are not humans or humanoids, that they are
Correct.
Android.
Correct.
Explain how you know this.
They don't have, okay, so there's a woman that I know that her mother was CIA.
Okay.
And before she passed on, she gave this woman documents about Dulce, documents about extraterrestrial knowledge, and documents about the Greys. And then she gave them to me, and when we were friends, and I used that in my research in the book. So the Greys, the reason that, like, people, when they get abducted and they get confused on whether a Grey is good or bad, is because the Greys are a servant race. They take on the mission of their masters. So you won't know by looking at the Grey whether it's good or bad. And you're right, they are androids because they have no internal organs. Their organ is their skin, and it acts like the leaves on a tree. So they absorb their energy through their skin and they also expel it. But they have a massive brain, right?
Right.
So that's all that they have.
There's a professor that wrote a book, and I had his assistant on the show, and I think it was probably a year and a half ago. And she released the book. He released the book, but she did interviews in his stead because he had passed away. There's an entire book about how the Greys were actually androids. And I mean, it was a thick book, probably about 300 pages long. One of the most fascinating books I've ever read about the Grey phenomena. And again, without, I think, having inside knowledge, or having not, he might have dissected one. I'm not quite sure, but it seemed like he had inside knowledge, inside and out, of how these things worked. But it was scary. It was scary to think of how these things, and he seemed to have intimate knowledge of how they operated, even across the galaxy from their supposed quote unquote masters. But it was frightening. The entire book was frightening. Is it to you, do they seem malevolent, the Greys, in their intent? Or is it just they're just servants and they're just doing whatever?
Yeah.
Whatever
it depends
behind it.
Who they're serving, right? If they serve the Arcturians, they're benevolent. If they serve certain reptilians, they're malevolent, right? You can't tell.
Yeah, okay. You bring up Arcturians. I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead. What were you going to finish that?
They're kind of like mercenaries.
Okay. Fair enough. You bring up Arcturians. Explain who the Arcturians are and where they fall in all this.
Arcturians are a benevolent race. They have, they are like the biggest foe of the evil, like reptilians and others. They are champions of justice, but because of universal law, they can't get into conflict with other races. So they work through people that they have chosen to chosen to be their trustees, I suppose.
Okay.
To help them out or to guide them. But they're not allowed to get into conflict or armed conflict, because that would be a gross violation of the universal laws.
Because I don't have the words for it, Paul, describe your antagonists in the book. I don't quite know how to describe them.
The antagonists?
Yeah.
The reptilians?
Well, not the reptilians.
Or the mercenaries?
Yes, the mercenaries.
All right. So the mercenaries are, they're about 3 million mercenaries around the world right now. The biggest employer of mercenaries are the military-industrial complex corporations that are maintaining, certain levels of secrecy, watching over their facilities, just making sure that things are secure. And as I mentioned, they were at one time good soldiers and stuff, but sometimes when you leave the service, there's something that's missing. And one could be money, because they do get paid well. And the other is the hunger for excitement and even violence. And so that underground base is shared between the reptilians and the mercenaries.
Which is interesting. It's, there's a chapter in the book where you have an underground train that connects a lot of these different bases. That in itself, okay, that blows my mind. This underground train works on, what is it, levitation? Is that what it works on?
Yeah, magnetic levitation. It's maglev, yeah.
Is that right? Real, or is that a figment of your imagination?
No, it's based on testimony.
Really?
Yeah.
And it goes from base to base?
Right. They go from base to base. They go from, like White Sands, and Area 51. There are some pages in the internet where someone has a sketch of the map of the United States and shows the routes. But it's mostly in the West. And
it carries different soldiers / mercenaries from different base to different base.
Yeah.
Wow. And it does it at a couple 100 miles per hour, so it only takes...
Sure. Yeah.
It only takes...
Like a bullet train.
Like a bullet train.
Yeah.
Wow. And we can't get that kind of travel.
Well, not yet.
Not yet.
Right.
Interesting. I'm telling you, folks, there's stuff in this book that'll blow your mind. Speaking of blowing our minds, I want to, and again, I'm kind of skipping around because, again, there's some stuff in this book, folks. I'm telling you, you gotta read this. You gotta read this book. It's gonna change your thinking. I want to talk a little bit about chemtrails and contrails. It's just a real quick boom. You just kind of set it in front of us, kind of like a tasty little morsel in the middle of a multi-course dinner. And it happens to be dialogue between a couple of players in your book. as a side conversation. And you mentioned chemtrails and contrails and what exactly they are and how they've affected our Earth. And I believe it's Lewis that just kind of throws it out there that this is why I believe we're having so many problems with Alzheimer's disease and other things. And boom. Do you want to explain just briefly what the bombshell is that you dropped on everybody in that?
Well, as I mentioned, in 1984, I believe, I read it in the book, the Council for Foreign Relations, they commissioned the Carnegie Institute to do a study on using light metals in the air to slow down global warming. And the study, when it came out, it indicated, that the application would be effective, but there are some risks involved. You would get a higher incidence of cancer. They didn't know about the Alzheimer's, but they said that if we didn't do it, that there probably would be a lot of famine from drought and from floods. So they did a risk assessment and they decided to go with it, which is okay, but just tell us, don't tell us that you're doing this, because the alternative would be worse. Okay.
Right.
So that's what I read about. And as I mentioned, when I saw that study and I read the study, I don't know if it was like the next week or something like that, but I tried to go back into the website to read it again, and it was gone, and it never appeared again. So they commissioned the Carnegie Institute. They had it published, like probably in a draft form,
mm-hmm.
and then whoever had whoever had the luck to read it, were able to read it, but then it was gone.
Then they decided it was probably a bad idea to put this out there, and then they yanked it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, of course. I mean, well, it looks bad, first of all, that we put all this up in the atmosphere. And then I suppose the litigious part of it is, well, we just put all this up in the atmosphere and you can come back and sue us for all these different health issues too. So especially if
who? We don't even know who's doing it.
Well, if you tie it back to the Carnegie Institute, I suppose they could, they could be the ones who suffer.
They just did the study. They didn't do that.
Oh, they just did the study. Okay. Well,
yeah.
But I read that bombshell and I go, whoa. That's a bit of a bombshell. That's a bit of a thing that set me a bit on edge as I was reading that. The other one I had heard before, but every time I read it, I guess I kind of set myself back on edge, and that's the agreement between aliens and our government. Can you recap that for our viewers and listeners?
It's not the government. It's the military-industrial complex.
I'm sorry. I stand
Eisenhower
corrected.
warned us cryptically about that before he left office, about the military-industrial complex. What happened was that there was a plan for a meeting with one extraterrestrial race, but their condition was that we were to get rid of our nuclear capabilities before we were to get transfer of technology from them. And right away, Eisenhower and MJ-12 decided that it was probably a Russian plot, so they didn't do that. Another alien race contacted them and said, "We'll meet. There are no conditions." So Eisenhower was there. An Archbishop of Los Angeles was there, I believe, and executives from, Grumman, Rockwell, and I don't know, Boeing maybe.
Hmm.
But there are our military executives were there, military contractor executives were there when the aliens were telling and asking that they wanted to abduct personnel and would return them without harm. Eisenhower was not too comfortable with it, and he left. But who remained were the military industrial complex guys, and they made the deal with those aliens. So they got the technology. They've been sitting on it, and they're running the show regarding that. And that's what Eisenhower warned us about before he left, and that's what JFK wanted to warn us about when he found out about it, but he got silenced.
Wow. So with that in mind here, Paul, and I guess as we start to wrap up today, I'll ask you this question. With that in mind, you have President Trump in office who says he's going to release what's left of the JFK files or the JFK assassination files, which, that's probably not sitting in there. The Warren Commission didn't put that out. But you have these different hearings on Capitol Hill saying, well, tell us what this craft is. Tell us what this craft is. You have the government saying, well, we don't know what these aliens are. We don't know what this stuff is. Why don't you come forward? But it seems like one big goose chase, right? Or it seems like one big nothing
Right.
burger.
It's intentional.
What do you think it is, in your opinion?
It's intentional. So one of the main premises in the book is that everyone wants disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
They want the governments to reveal what kind of information we have about the extraterrestrials. They want to have that technology. They want they assume that the extraterrestrials have better technology regarding health and things like that, and energy, of course, clean energy. But that's not going to happen because the extraterrestrials, all of them see us as a very dangerous species. We are probably the most dangerous species in the universe because our high intelligence combined with what the Bible says is our original sin, but is really our DNA, makes us violent, barbaric, have an irrational obsession with possessions, and being racist to the point of being genocidal. You combine all that together, the extraterrestrials have us under what's called a technological quarantine. We're not allowed to get their technology until we fundamentally change. And they have advised major countries that if we were to gain their technology, that they would probably do a preemptive strike because they are concerned that we would take the technology and then the bad parts about us would weaponize it and use it against them in some form of like the Monroe Doctrine or Manifest Destiny or spreading Christianity or taking their resources because we need those resources, that kind of thing. That's what they're trying to stop. And so our governments are plain stupid to try and dummy down this urge for disclosure.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes complete sense. With that being said, trying to find a way to carefully phrase this. With that being said, do we continue to chase that bit of carrot on a stick. I mean, it seems to me that it's going nowhere right now. I mean,
Right.
we're throwing out the same questions. We're getting the same answers. We're really not getting anything as far as our governments go.
Correct.
And what's the answer as far as meeting in the middle? I mean, because, and I've contended this for a couple of years now on this show that if an alien landed on the front lawn of the White House, half the people in the nation would show up in pickup trucks with shotguns and try to shoot it. And the other half would try to put their hand out and try to shake its hand. I mean, there's,
Right.
there's, and you've just answered that question for me eloquently. There's no all-seeing, all-knowing agreement between everybody here that they would welcome it with open arms. And there's a general distrust that they'd be willing to help. So with that in mind, I guess I'm stammering here a little bit to ask you this question. We always hear that, well, these aliens would come down and would help us if we were going to stumble and kill ourselves. So in other words, if we were on the brink of World War III, is there any salvation from above?
Only if we are to damage Earth, because Earth is important to them, because Earth is the school where the spirits link to the humans to learn about love, about pain, suffering, beauty, creativity, everything that contributes to the human element, the human experience that a spirit cannot experience on their own. See, that's why they're linked to us. And so if we learn the lesson, right? If the spirit learns the lesson, then they advance to a next form. If they don't learn the lesson, then they come back into another form. So Earth is a school, and it's important that they've been watching that we don't destroy it, because it's important for the entire universe. It's like the kindergarten for the entire universe for spirits. Okay. And they don't care about the humans. The humans could be replaced, but not the Earth.
Hmm. And with that, are there resources that they're using here on Earth? Or is it just for them? Is it just the school? They just don't want us to knock over the school building.
Yeah. No, it's just that, you notice crop circles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my hypothesis of crop circles is nothing more than graffiti from a very advanced race that just, wants to leave something behind, and that's all it is.
Interesting.
They're not puzzles. They're not prophecies. They're just really, just graphic art from individuals that are highly intelligent.
Just saying something like Bleezorp was here. That was it, huh?
Right.
Interesting. All right. Well, with that, Paul, we'll tell people that the Disclosure Paradox Book 1 is available right now. We have a link in the description of this program. Again, I highly encourage people to go get this book. It's a wonderful story. I know.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
All right. So the point, spirituality is important, and we need to evolve spiritually. That's what the paradox is. How are we to evolve spiritually if we're not allowed to know what's wrong with us? But what I write in the preface and what I go through the whole book is essentially we're here to make life better for others instead of making life better for ourselves at the expense of others. And if we do that, we could start to evolve and then eventually be part of the universe.
Eloquently put. There you go. The Disclosure Paradox Book 1 is available right now. We have a link to it in the description of this program. Again, I encourage you to go get the book. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tim. Good questions. And I enjoy your, it went fast.
It did go fast, didn't it? Yeah, most definitely. And I take it there's a book 2?
Book 2, yeah. That'll be in September. It closes up some loose ends. and it goes a little deeper into spirituality, and it really hits hard against the Vatican and Catholicism, because it's about a conspiracy to destroy the Shroud of Turin.
Oh, we may have to talk about that. I have some relatives
Definitely.
who hid that thing for a couple hundred years, so we may have to talk about that in the next book when that comes out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
Excellent.
that'll be good.
All right.
I can't wait for that one to go out.
All right. So we'll talk again, my friend. So thank you so much, Paul Vecchiet, for being on the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So, folks, that'll do it for today. A couple of reminders before we go. First of all, the Apple app is available, of course, as you know. If you have the Apple app, be sure to update it. iOS 18.3 is out right now. And the new update, the Darkness Radio Apple app update, is available as well. Be sure to look in your Apple store. If you happen to have taken it off your phone for one reason or another, be sure to re-upload it as well. Be sure to check that out. If you're not watching this show on YouTube right now, darknessradioshow.com, you can both get the audio and the video of this show. That's one way to watch it. Otherwise, go to the YouTube channel, The Original Darkness Radio. Watch the video of this very show that you're listening to right now. Be sure to like and subscribe there. Also, check out darknessradioshow.com and check out the store. Lots of cool swag there. Check that out as well. And finally, go be a light in someone's darkness this weekend. Go help someone in need. Lots of snowstorms around the nation this week. Go help an elderly neighbor, maybe someone who's physically incapacitated. Go help them shovel out a driveway. Go help with some snow clearing. Go help somebody, maybe go help them shop for groceries. Somebody who is in need this weekend. So have a good weekend, everybody. We'll see you next week for another great week of the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.